Today, let's talk about destroying the king's shelter. Sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? Well, it's not ghost and goblin scary. It's more like a tornado's coming at my house scary. Now, let's start by looking at different pawn structures, and we're going to focus on the h6 pawn advance. Notice how black, at some point earlier in this game, put his pawn on h6. So, after the move knight to c4, well, that actually helps white because it reroutes the bishop back to c1, and we're already eyeballing this h6 pawn. Okay, now after black backed his bishop up, looks like he's going to reroute his bishop also. White played queen h5. It's not hard to figure out what white's doing here, double teaming this h6 pawn. This is sometimes called a hook, meaning you want to target or you want to hook onto the pawn that has been advanced in front of your opponent's king. White is definitely going to be sacrificing for that pawn. Okay, black moved his rook over, which I think he's having a little space for his king to run away, but no time for that. Bishop takes h6. Now, you don't have to capture back, but if you don't, you just lost a pawn. So black decided to see what white was up to. And after queen takes, we can see the black king is not able to run away. Now, you can't checkmate with just a queen, but here's the important thing. Black can't get that queen out of there. There's no time for black to put his queen on e7 and then f8 to offer a trade because white is hopping in there a little bit too quickly. Notice if the queen does travel over to this square and white plays knight to g5, which is what white played in the game anyway, after queen f8, that takes away the king's escape square, and of course queen h7 would just be mate. So if we go back to the game, black tried this desperate move knight to b2, trying to get rid of this attacker. Now notice if you take the knight with the bishop and black takes back, then the black queen will actually have a discovered defense. Yeah, there is such a thing to come over here and defend. So the winning idea for white was not to let that black queen defend. White instead played knight to g5, and after knight to g5, black took, but it wasn't really the bishop that was going to go after the king, it was the knight. Knight to h7, and there is no way, there's no reasonable way to stop the knight from going to f6 and getting checkmate. You could sack your queen, but it's not really going to help in the long run. Okay, so if h6 is weak for black, what about h3 for white? This idea happens a lot in an opening called the King's Indian Defense. Of course, white's pawn has played h3. White was trying to stop black from playing g4, but I think you can kind of tell black's going to get this move anyway. Now, before we focus on h3, look what white does. White usually attacks on the queen side, and white tried to destroy black's pawns by playing knight takes a7, a sacrifice to break through. Only one little problem. There's no black king on that side of the chessboard. And after rook takes and knight takes, white is clearly hoping that these two passed pawns make two queens. But long before that happens, black is going to go after the king. The bishop is being double attacked, and I think you know what's happening here. If we sacrifice for the h3 pawn, then our g4 move will come with much more ferocity. Might want to look that word up in the big dictionary. Bishop takes h3. Now, of course, white could take back, and we know this pawn's coming forward. White tried to delay things by playing knight to c8, hoping that black's bishop will come all the way back and a trade will happen on the c8 square. But black has no interest in that. Instead, he adds more fuel to the fire with rook to g7, and we've got a triple battery. So after white takes g4 and the position is exploding, I think we can see here black's pieces are breaking through. Takes, takes, takes. I guess you could take this pawn and go for a fork, but black's interested in checkmate, not winning material. Knight takes g4, and any knight move is discovered attack on the next turn. So white decided to try to capture that, but after queen takes and king over, this sly little rook move, rook to h7, ended the game. There's no real great way to stop rook to h1. That king is not going to survive in the long run. So now we've seen h6 and h3 as very common hooks to attack. But what happens if your opponent does not move the h-pawn? Have no fear, the attack is still there. Here, black has done nothing to hurt his own king's pawn shelter, but as I said, that's not going to be a problem. Bishop takes h7, kind of a version of the Greek gift sacrifice we learned a long time ago. We've also just recently learned about rook lifts, and that's about to happen. The rook is going to come up and over. We're combining a lot of elements now that we're deep into the king levels. Rook to h3 check. Of course, the king comes out, mate in 1 after queen h5. So the king has to duck back into his shelter. Here comes the battery, queen h5. We're threatening multiple checkmates. There's only one way to stop both of them, and that's to put our queen in the way, queen h6. But now, look at this clever idea. We add a third piece to the attack, knight to f5. Now, there's no good queen move that stops mate except to trade queens, but if you've ever heard of Anastasia's mate, that's right, some checkmates are so pretty they have their own name. Anastasia, was that the name of a princess? I'm not sure. Knight to e7 check, the king is forced into that open file, and rook takes h5. The knight plugs both of the escape squares, the rook delivers mate. So even with a perfect pawn shelter, you are not immune from possible mates. Let's take a look at another similar example. Here, there's nothing aiming at h7, so we're going to target yet another square, the g7 pawn. And even though black is defending g7 with almost his entire army, white sacrifices anyway, and not even with the knight, with the rook. That undermines the f6 pawn. Undermine means to take the legs out from under the table. Table comes crashing down. Rook takes, knight takes f6. We only have 2 pawns for the rook, but we've already got a fork going, and we released the power of our furthest advanced pawn. Let's see how this works out. Queen e7, we get some of our material back. Okay, now we're only down a piece for a couple of pawns, and first we play queen f4 to double attack this knight. Black only has one way to defend it, which is rook to e7, and then f6 goes forward, and black really has no good moves here, because if his rook travels forward to continue guarding the knight, another sacrifice would happen, and after takes we'd play f7, and there's no good way here for the queen to stop the promotion and guard the rook. In fact, if the queen traveled sideways, we'd have mate in 2. Look at this. Queen takes, queen blocks, and we can promote to a rook or a queen. Let's do a rook just to be fancy, and that would be checkmate. Let's go back to the actual game. Black realized in this position that hanging on to his knight was not going to happen, so he tried the clever counterattack knight to g6. But after rook takes, knight takes, f7 anyway, and black resigned, because he's got to block the pawn, but after the queen traveled to the square f6 and you block, then we promote, and this time we better choose a queen. Even though it's not mate right away, then we can mate on the next turn, and black has gone down. Okay, we've looked at sacrifices on h6, on h7, on g7. Our final one, let's do a double sacrifice. Again, it might look like the black king is safe, but you can already see we've got a half open file, we got a bishop, and we got a queen that can all get there in a hurry. And you know what? Don't sleep on this rook on a1. He's going to play a part in the game. White began with bishop takes h7 check, another Greek gift sacrifice. And after king takes, let's throw in the queen check. Of course, black's play is forced. And now rook takes, the double sacrifice. King takes, the other rook plays, rook to g1. The king only has one move. Now, here's the key position. White had to see this in advance. I know you're probably looking at check, and you're looking at the other check, but you know, both of those moves allowed the king to start walking. And strange as it may seem, the black king may actually survive if he starts running down the chessboard. We only have 2 pieces left. So, amazingly, it takes a quiet move to win. Do you see the winning idea for white? Did you find f5? If you found it, congratulations, you have just finished off a very nice double sacrifice. There's no good way in this position for black to defend against queen to g5 mate. I suppose he could push the pawn, but at the very least, white would win the queen after queen to g5 check with a skewer of the king and the queen. Those were some exciting games, chess kids. As you can see, if your opponent advances that h-pawn, use that pawn as a hook. Sometimes you can pry apart his safety. And even if he doesn't move his pawns, we've still seen some great ways to destroy the opponent's pawn shelter.